Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Going to read to you with regards to our captioning this morning. Captions are available on Zoom. Please navigate to your Zoom toolbar and look for the CC closed caption button. Click it and a pop-up menu will appear. Click Show Subtitle to see the captions. Captions are also available on stream text if you prefer to follow along on a different device. I will go ahead and place the link to captioning in the chat now. Just a few housekeeping notes as well. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. I'll keep a good eye out for you. And please stay muted if you are not talking for consideration of our other attendees. Thank you.
Hey, Trina, this is June. Do you want to introduce yourself? I don't know that people know you.
Oh, certainly. Hello again. My name is Shana Brody, and I'm the operations manager for CFILC. I've been on board since June 7th. Previously, I worked for about 10 years with the California Association of Area Agencies on Aging. So I'm very familiar with Christina and her team, and I'm very glad to be here. And I'm glad to be here with you all this morning. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I think gradually we'll see more of you and less of Megan.
Oh.
So,
Perhaps.
Anyways, I'm June Kales, and I'm a disability policy consultant and contractor with CFILC's Cal Disaster Coalition, and the host of these calls. I always forget to do this. You know, I have pepper graying hair, which reminds me I'm older than I think I am, and my virtual background is just a hastily semi-cleaned up office, but I'm not sure I really succeeded at that. As we wait for a few people to join us, just a reminder that the upcoming calls that are on the docket are, we have a call next month called What's in Your Go Bags? And that'll be a kind of what I'm calling a peer-to-peer learning call, P2PL. And that's kind of strengthening our own disaster resilience by shared experiences. So kind of goes beyond the typical, you know, make a plan, build a kit, you know, blah, blah, blah. It really kind of capitalizes on our experiences and what we've learned in the emergency space over the years, particularly as people who focus on emergencies all the time, and also people who live the experience, live the disability experience. So it's going to be fun, it's going to be casual. We're going to have some highly experienced judges to award some very highly valued emergency and related prizes. So I think it'll be a good time and casual and fun. After that, in September, I'll be doing a call on emergency planning and response roles of health plans serving people with disabilities. And people always say, June, why do we care about that? And frankly, we care about that because unlike any other service system, whether it's independent living centers, area agencies on aging, regional centers, health plans touch more people with disabilities than any other service system. They also have a great deal of resources that they can muster in times of planning, response, and recovery that we often struggle to get in place. So it's been a year-long project, and I'll just give you some of the highlights of what we learned and what's in it for example, independent living centers in terms of contracting, and where we go from there. So today, as most of you know, our structure is a short panel discussion followed by hopefully a very robust discussion up to whatever time, probably around 60 minutes. Post your questions in chat. They'll be read and discussed by our panelists and by Gina. And well, if you're not unable to post them, we'll call on you. Just use your raise hand function in on the I think it's a participant list. So just a reminder, we learn a lot from your feedback. So there'll be a poll at the end of the call. And if you're unable to use the poll, I will post in chat a survey monkey that will contain the same questions. Reminder, these calls are archived and they'll be available about a week or so after the call. So today we're talking about emergency transportation. We have two panelists, Roxy Crawford from TEMA and Marilyn Golden from Greta.
Seems June has frozen.
That looks like more than stage fright.
Yes, seems that she's frozen. Maybe Marilyn, did you want to, if she doesn't come back?
Do you think I should just go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
Sure, no problem. Well, hi, everyone. It's good to see you, people I know and people I don't know. I'm Marilyn Golden. I'm Senior Policy Analyst with DREDF, the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. We're a national law and policy center on disability civil rights based at the Ed Roberts campus in Berkeley with the Governmental Affairs Office in Washington, D.C. And over the years of my long and wonderful, actually, for me, time at DREDF, one of the main things I focused on is transportation. And June wanted me to give an overview of what is happening. People may have heard about California law, the TNC Access for All Act, which in theory was to provide wheelchair accessible service from transportation network companies, which is a category that means services such as Uber and Lyft. Did we get June back on yet, by the way? Does anyone? I don't see her. Either.
No, I don't see June back on.
All right, she'll be back soon.
Yes.
Going on 3 years ago, a lot of us were very excited that Senator Hill, State Senator Hill, wanted to do a bill about wheelchair access to TNCs. And he had a terrific staff person who was very dedicated to this goal, and while new to disability issues, was a quick study, and we worked a lot with her on the text of the bill. And I'm starting way back before this was even a law, just for people to understand the political context, because one of the leading factors in the political context was that in order to pass the legislature, this bill needed the support. Another way to say it is, sorry about that, needed not to have the opposition of Uber and Lyft, the big TNCs. And so the June, you're back. Do you want to say something? Hi, we just went on ahead and jumped in.
Yeah, sorry about that. That never happened to me before. Yeah, lost internet connection. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to say that yeah, Marilyn's gonna kind of update us on Uber and Lyft, and that frankly, I've known Marilyn for decades. She's a good friend and she's a stellar advocate in the transportation world and on many other issues. So that was it, Marilyn. Sorry
Okay.
for the brief disappearance. Back to you.
Not at all. You left your event in capable hands. We put our heads together and decided to just jump in. So the fact that Uber and Lyft, we're going to have to not oppose this bill. So the staff kind of would go from our group, which was disability advocates and some transit agency people who are, true friends of ours in terms of the kind of goals of the service that we want, from us to them, to us to them. And because of this, there are some sort of strange issues in the language. And I felt it was a long shot for success, but we had to give it a try because really there was nothing else happening in California about wheelchair access to Uber and Lyft. And that's partially because California has a strange structure for jurisdiction over TNCs, transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. Usually they are subject to local or regional authority the way taxis are. And in California, they're under the California Public Utilities Commission, which never had a super stellar record on disability issues. And so, but we had to give it a shot. And so the law was passed and it went to the CPUC, and the CPUC, the way I've never with any body like the CPUC. I mean, it's different than like working with federal regulations or state regulations. They do things in rounds or tracks. So in stages, we're now on stage 4. We're on track 4 of regulating. And a few of the disability groups got together and formed a team. So we've been working actually with Disability Rights California and with the Center for Accessible Technology, which has a lot of experience with the CPUC. And track 1 actually went very well. The 2 major questions were, 1, would it be a statewide system or only where there were major metropolitan areas? And 2, I think the other one would be, would the fee that every TNC passenger must pay, which was to fund the system of wheelchair accessible service, would that be limited to the 5-cent minimum in the statute, or could the CPUC raise it? And the CPUC actually did a good job on both of those and agreed with the disability advocates that yes, it would be a statewide system, and yes, they could set the fee where they wanted, and they started it at 10 cents, so they raised it right away. And again, that system is to raise money from every TNC passenger for every ride to go into a large fund that would pay for service. We have been less enthused about the results from track 2 and track 3, which have had a lot to do with how do you measure exactly what is considered success by Uber and Lyft. And we have not been thrilled with the way they're collecting and sort of counting the data. And why this matters is because TNCs are allowed in the statute to take offsets. So in a particular quarter, they can keep the fee and not send it into the state if they perform at a certain level. And also they can take exemptions, which last for an entire quarter if they've done well leading up to that and submitted data that the CPUC deems as performing adequately. And we're not happy with those benchmarks. It's complicated, but in summary, they're not what we would hope to see. On the other hand, it has meant that Uber and Lyft have started wheelchair accessible service in some of the big metropolitan areas, at least in California. Lyft, just San Francisco County and LA County, Los Angeles County. Uber in 12 counties. They don't have to serve every county. They can choose to serve a county where they wish to. Where they do, they're supposed to provide accessible service. And so we know that, and this has not been happening in a vacuum. Uber also decided about a year before this TNC Access for All Act in California, mostly because it had taken a lot of bad bumps in the public relations department, in the public view. And so there was a little more power being accrued by the staff that were pushing for the right thing. They announced a pilot program, nothing to do with the California law. They announced a pilot program for 7 metropolitan areas in the US and Canada. And they included LA and San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, New York, etc. And they had started providing service, wheelchair accessible service, using contracting with companies that know how to provide accessible service, because they usually contract for paratransit contracts. And we know that those function best when they're tightly monitored and when enforcement is firm and active and robust, and not when it's not. But anyway, Uber has mostly contracted with MV Transit and Lyft with First Transit. The feedback we get from the cities, both in California and elsewhere where this is happening, is that if you're a wheelchair user and you're calling for a pickup, somewhere roughly speaking near the center of a major urban area, you will get service in, often a reasonable amount of time. I tested that myself and it was true. But if you are far from the urban center, it's a lot harder to get a prompt service. And I think that's probably true in the California locations that Uber and Lyft are serving under the TNC Access for All Act. The disability advocates have maintained with the CPUC that Uber and Lyft are required by disability rights laws to be providing this service. And if anything, the TNC Access for All Act is just a way to help them do it and structure it, but it doesn't sort of erase their broader mandates under state and federal disability rights law. So that has been our main contention. And we have another round, or maybe yet another round of regulation. And I'll just throw in one last thing. A recent development is that the transit agency in San Francisco, the San Francisco SFMTA, also called often nicknamed San Francisco Muni, has been working with Uber on how to measure the benchmarks, and putting forward some joint regulations, which is an interesting political development because each proceeding at the CPUC is associated with a particular commissioner, and ours is with Commissioner Sharoma. And we have done, you know, some of the disappointing rulings by the CPUC that we've seen really seem to be oriented a lot towards what Lyft wanted. And they seem to have some sort of political in or pull or something with, I'm not sure what office. I mean, you can't, it's very hard to know what's happening behind the scenes. But the fact now that we have Uber plus a very prominent transit agency in San Francisco and plus some of the disability groups agreeing on a particular scheme, we're very hopeful that the CPUC will not feel like they can turn that down and do something other than that, which may be desired by Lyft, who is the apple of their eye for whatever reason, I do not know. So that's the politics of it. Don't tell anyone what I've told you, but I wanted people to understand what has maybe kept this program from being everything we want. I don't know if there's anybody here from San Diego, but we understood that some of the disability community leaders in San Diego, which Uber is in theory serving with wheelchair accessible service, didn't even know it was there. So this is not something we like to hear. And we hope that there's less of a discrepancy sooner than later. Believe it or not, that was a summary. One could talk all day about how this program has evolved. I'd be happy to answer questions an hour later.
Well, thanks, Marilyn. That was actually a lot to take in, and it's not the first time I've heard it from you. So, well, you know, if you could, I guess I would just, how can we be helpful to you, man? I mean, you're really the lead on this. What do you need from us? So many of us think that this is such a critical issue, and yet we don't really know how to help or what to do. I mean, CPUC is such a convoluted entity to interact with.
CPUC is very difficult. But we've been bugging them about how hard it is for individuals who aren't like formal parties to a proceeding to have their voices heard. So there are ways to do it. And, you know, if a lot of people with disabilities express their views to the commission and put pressure on the commission to provide service that is truly equivalent to service provided to the general public. And we could help you detail it a little bit more than that. It could help. So we can talk about that. I don't know how many people saw an alert that a disability advocate has been working with San Francisco Muni. She put out a couple of months ago in connection with the last round of regulation, a very good alert. And we could probably get them to do it again if we could have some sense that the disability community would really respond.
Doing this, Christina, can I ask a couple questions?
Go for it.
Hi, Marilyn, great to see you.
Hi.
Two things. So one, obviously this issue is incredibly important in all in every way facet of disability world. In disaster, transportation is an ongoing issue. In everyday life, transportation is an ongoing issue. So my question is, so one thing is, when I talk to folks outside of the disability community, the Uber and Lyft and TNC discussion on accessibility doesn't even register. And I have to always remind myself that I live and work in a disability bubble. And so when I say to people, gosh, it must be nice just to call an Uber or Lyft, I wish I had that kind of access. People look at me like, what? And I say, well, wheelchair users can't just jump on a Lyft or an Uber. And it's like a light bulb moment. People have no clue, like they've never even thought about that. But I bring that up because I think there's a lot of allies out there that could potentially be assisting us on this issue, but literally just don't even know it's an issue for us. And secondly, you're right, the CPUC is incredibly daunting. And we have put in public comments, both officially and unofficially, on a variety of issues. But because we have been working so closely with the CPUC on public safety power shutoffs, the chairwoman is, we've got the chairwoman's ear. And I'm wondering if what your impression, or if you think this is an issue that she's gravitated towards, is something that we should also try to bring up during maybe some of our PSPS discussions to get her to understand it. It has to do with everything, but it's another major issue that our community is really concerned about and wants the PUC to really prioritize.
Well, that would be great. As some people know, I'm moving, whether temporarily or permanently, I'm not sure, a little bit into the background while I deal with some health issues. And but the disability advocates team that has been working together, I'm sure would be glad to meet with you. And also, you know, our friends at San Francisco Muni, who we've worked with very closely and who have been complete allies with us. I mean, no distance between kind of our positions and what we've wanted. And we can make sure that a meeting happens if you want to do it. Someone should take the lead, and I could, help coordinate a little bit to give you a sense of kind of where to start, and maybe some, model letters and things like that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Hi, Marilyn. It's Russell Rawlings. It's really good to see you again, and glad to hear you giving this knowledge. Just curious as to where the advocates group that you just mentioned, what the best place to get connected with that group is currently.
Well, I mean, we're pretty informal. I'm working on it from Dredif. Autumn Elliott, who's a lawyer from Disability Rights California based in Los Angeles, is representing DRC, and Melissa Kasnitz from the Center for Accessible Technology is, and really, I mean, write me, and I can coordinate, help you coordinate with the other people who are involved, also people from San Francisco Muni. So, I mean, maybe good to start with me just because I know, we talk about this here and I know where it's coming from. But I think people are going to be very welcome to have some outside, organizing. We tried to do organizing in the disability community in the first few rounds. We put out some alerts, and we just didn't get a lot of response. And it's so overwhelming just to kind of keep up with. So we have dropped off a bit, but I think this is a good shot in the arm. We really welcome people's involvement.
I sense that one of the pieces of frustration too is going to be that this may be considered to be kind of an urban metro issue as opposed to something that's say available for more rural areas, which I think kind of the reverse needs to be kind of looked at as true, as honestly that the rural areas need the extra support of something like a TNC to fill in the gaps where, you know, there may not be fixed route services of many kinds and other options. So I'm particularly interested to see if maybe we can think about building capacity and areas outside of the large metro areas, and thinking about how to push particularly strongly in underserved and rural areas.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let me just briefly say that those of us working on it have had that in mind the entire time, over the last couple of years. And, you know, we're very unhappy with some ridiculous rulings the CPUC has made in that area. But the law allows for the money gained in a particular county to be distributed to other entities that provide accessible service that would, you know, apply for it. So there is a mechanism for providers that are not Uber and not Lyft, like, you know, non-emergency medical transportation providers, taxi providers, et cetera, both in urbanized and non-urbanized counties, to apply for and get some of this money to provide wheelchair accessible on-demand service. And that's been a center of activity. And so it's not, I mean, the threshold issue is, you know, excuse me, whether a TNC is going to serve a rural area. Because if it isn't, there's no basis for raising the money. But if it is, and some of the medium-sized cities, for example, are places that this could really be effective, there is a mechanism to get money to other providers. There's been a pissing match over the issue of whether the other providers have to be entities licensed by the CPUC, which is ridiculous, because those are entities that are more like charter services. And, you know, we've been arguing ourselves blue in the face that it should be any entity, and entities like taxi providers, et cetera, are going to be some of the most knowledgeable. And some of the county, you know, transportation agencies are in position to coordinate the funding. So we're just hoping that that does provide a good mechanism to serve people by entities, not just Uber and Lyft.
You know, June, I think this is a very deep and complex issue, and hopefully for Russell, who does the calls on the fourth Thursday of the month, the strategy calls, this conversation needs to be considered part one of a many-part discussion where we can really start to, you know, peel the onion, because there is a audience of advocates here that get this, that are willing to help and support and, you know, do what needs to get done. So with your guidance, Marilyn, hopefully you'll help us to shape part two and beyond. And I want to pivot, but Marilyn, I don't want you to go away. I just want to pivot over to
I'll be here.
Roxy, who is our female Region 9 person, to also give us her perspective on emergency transportation, or, where are we and where are we not? And, we've often said it's in the plan, but is it even real? And what are the real options? Where is paratransit and all this, TNCs and others? I mean, we've been nibbling around the margins of this issue forever. So, Roxy, over to you.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Like June said, Roxanne Crawford. I'm the FEMA Region 9 Disability Integration Specialist, and work with so many of you on a regular basis. And these are conversations that a lot of us have had before, especially Vance. If you're hearing things, please feel free to jump in anytime. As a FEMA employee, it's interesting to talk about evacuation and transportation because it really is jurisdictional, right? The responsible party is the jurisdiction. But when we talk about evacuation, there's really these three kind of primary objectives. And we so often get so hyper-focused on the emergency evacuation, which of course is the number one most important thing, is if there's a need to evacuate for life-saving, life safety, being able to provide that accessible transportation to expedite the movement of people and animals and resources. There's also the issues of access control, like preventing people from independently entering at-risk areas. And what does that transportation look like when we've kind of altered that scope of the current public transportation or the current system to restrict those access pieces? And then again, that ensuring the safe re-entry, the types of challenge that can be faced specifically by people with disabilities re-entering areas after disasters. And again, when we have systems in place, and we talked some earlier about kind of these main urban areas and hubs, and that does become a focus, but it is even more challenging when we get to our rural areas that have maybe more limited access to public transportation services and paratransit options to be able to re-enter areas safely, things like that. Reestablishing routes and public transportation, support services and entry of support services to those areas, and then accommodations for all of that. So if that responsibility lies with the jurisdiction, what can advocates do? What can organizations, groups, agencies, how do they get involved? What types of questions do they ask? June and I had this conversation some weeks ago, trying to think of different types of questions that might be actually setting off that light bulb that Marilyn was, or that Christina was talking about. People don't even think of these things being a barrier or an issue until we kind of make them aware of the fact that it is. So if we're reaching out to a jurisdiction, asking a question, who can I speak with there at the emergency management office or police or fire to discuss what services will be available in the event of an emergency activation and how can we utilize them? I'm from such and such organization, and we're trying to build personal preparedness and independence into this system to take some of that stress off of you. How can we work together to build this process going forward? I forgot to say, I'm not a questions at the end type of lady. If you've got something, bring it right now. Because, if I steer the conversation based off what I think you might want to talk about, then we may never hit what you actually want to talk about. And we'll run out of time anyway, because I could go forever and ever and ever. So bring it right when you have it. So, I'm working with my clients, or I'm working individually on creating an evacuation plan. And I want to make sure that I'm planning appropriately to ensure we're giving good recommendations and advice and not taxing the system and not promising things that can't be provided. It is in their best interest to work with you, and presenting it that way, like we're doing our part. Now we want to engage with you to ensure that you're doing your part, or that you even know that you have a part in this at all, right? And like Christina said, sometimes just asking those questions turns that light bulb of, I need to do this. This is a part of my responsibility and I haven't done it. Or, I don't want sometimes I don't want to talk with them. And it, you could sense the frustration, but that gives you an indicator that there's even more work that needs to be done, and that you may not be in an area or a place where those things are actually a part of the plan. And that's going to take even more advocacy. So we think about the three primary considerations: that kind of emergency evacuation, that controlled re-entry, and that access during an unsafe or potentially unsafe time when they're still investigating a situation. I think back to Paradise, where they opened it up on a limited basis based on addresses to individuals to go and survey their property and things like that. It was very restricted. So if somebody was taking some sort of, paratransit, or having support system go for them or in place of them because it wasn't an accessible area anymore, how do those accommodations come in place? I know it seems silly to talk about that in transportation, but it really does belong in transportation, because you get to the point where they can't get in because there are roadblocks. There are this issue really came to a head in Hawaii during the volcanoes. Who could access the neighborhoods and areas, and they were restricting individuals who had support individuals going on their behalf, because there hadn't been a process put in place for those accommodations, and it came to those traffic folks. And so programmatically, that kind of belongs in that zone. So if we go back to the first priority, which is evacuation and that transportation piece, and we're asking them, what type of services do you have available? Who can I speak with about that? Do they understand that their number one needs to be accessible transportation, and that accessible transportation may not be what they think it is, right? So people think if we can just get them on board. This is something we hear from lots of different jurisdictions throughout the country. Well, it's got a lift on it, but can that lift accommodate everyone? And does it accommodate the movement of assistive living devices, durable medical equipment, including larger items? So of course, a no notice event has a very different kind of looking evacuation, something immediate like an earthquake or a fast moving fire like Paradise, than a more kind of heads up event where we're being able to plan that transportation a little bit more in advance and kind of get a plan in place. The personal planning for sure needs to be better advised and encouraged. People need to keep devices charged and operational, have backup batteries, and perhaps even be advised or encouraged to save older, more basic tech as a backup, just in case, as things build up and get bigger, we might have some older things that we can use. And individuals need to have a plan with their needs identified, have that process to identify that evacuation assistance and those transportation needs.
So Roxy, hang on right there. That issue, Junior, is critical. And when we say that people need to have an evacuation plan in their personal plan, and yet they live in a rural area where there's no resources, or they even live in an urban area where on a good day they can't get a ride. I mean, what? It's so easy to say it needs to be part of the plan, but it's practically impossible to populate that plan.
I completely agree, June. This is one of those things where this is like an unsolved issue, right? So we talk about what we should do, and we talk about what should happen and what should be there, but unfortunately, I don't have the answers, and I haven't talked to anybody who does have the answers. And that's a part of this conversation, that we're hoping to have. I mean, we want people to participate in constructive conversations. What has worked in the past in other areas, what hasn't worked. And we look back to Oroville, the Oroville Dam evacuation, and there's so many different kind of, it's not a big urban area, and there were a lot of challenges associated with whose responsibility it is, making sure that they were able to accommodate all different individuals, all different types of evacuation, not just the evacuation, but the sheltering too. But we're talking about evacuation today. But where are they taking individuals to, and how are they moving those individuals between locations. If they take them to a shelter that can't accommodate them, what is the plan to move that individual? That was not a part of the plan. And it ended up falling a lot to local organizations and groups. You know, that opened up conversations about memorandums of understanding, memorandums of agreement, and the companies being willing to take a risk to go into an area that's being evacuated, and also to understand what the expectations are of them. And that's a conversation that has to happen up front. It has to happen before the event, because you can't sit and shout at each other, will you drive in to the potential dam break right now, when the drivers maybe live in that area and have evacuated already themselves. I saw your camera come up, Christina.
I mean, this is Christina. I completely understand, and it's a frustrating situation. But I do strongly believe in our disaster program. We push heavily on personalized preparedness for that reason, because we just see over and over again. And if anybody has, told me more than anyone in the world, June has reminded me every single time, what if nobody's coming to get you? What are you going to do? So personal preparedness is on the forefront of our minds when we're talking about any type of emergency or disaster preparedness. But the thing I also want to remind us is that because we sometimes work in silos, I don't want us to forget that we just had an opening like we've never seen before. And I'm hopeful that June will get me for this one, but I'm hopeful that we'll get something out of it. But the fact that the state was able to stand up a statewide contract for transportation services to get folks vaccinated, how do we look at, I mean, we need information, we need a report on what that actually looks like. But if that was truly something that really happened, and we, CFILC, has definitely worked to try to find situations where folks couldn't get that transportation if they wanted it. We've not found any through the IL network yet. So that's promising to me. That tells me that if we haven't heard of it, maybe it didn't happen as much as we thought it would have happened, but you never know. And I'm just thinking that is a practice that we need to understand how that contract was written. We need to make sure that local jurisdictions know that transportation was available across the state, and we need to determine who are the messengers to make sure that at the local level that's being discussed. So that's something that is now happened and continuing to happen. So local advocates need to make sure that that's a conversation that's coming up locally on how do we figure out who that transportation provider was for vaccines locally, and how do we bring them in to do a presentation on how it worked locally, and how do we feed it into our work to do disaster and emergency preparedness.
So, Christina, that is the billion-dollar question, Junior. And I think Vance, I saw Vance on the call. Vance, can you help us to look at that issue? Because it is a potential crack in the ceiling of barriers.
And I'm not sure if Vance is multitasking or not. This is Christina, but while he's maybe coming off mute, maybe somebody can text him and tell him to come on. I want to take this opportunity to also introduce CFILC's new Disability Disaster Access and Resource Manager, Sydney Pickern, who some of you might remember as a former participant from DREDF. She's now working with us at CFILC, and we're excited to have her on board.
Hi, welcome.
Hey, for Sydney.
Yay, thanks everyone. Transportation and evacuation is actually an issue that's near and dear to my heart, being a non-driver and a frequent paratransit user, among other things. I'm really appreciating this conversation, and just sort of in order of however you all might be able to address it. And I realize Vance is not slated as a presenter on this, but also did see him. Oh, hey, Vance. I just had a question to throw in as well after I posted it in the chat so it can go after June's question.
Yeah, that's great, Sydney. Welcome aboard, June here. And I want to post some of the resources that I have collected over the years that are good guidance resources, some of which are on the Cal OES website. But Vance, welcome, and over to you. I don't know. Did you hear the question about transportation of vaccine sites, and if that is a potential avenue for ongoing emergency evacuation resource for people?
And Vance, this is Christine, I'll just add in case you missed it. Since the state had contracted statewide to do this transportation, we've been trying to find within the IL network anyone that couldn't get a ride, but we seem to have not found that, which could be a really good thing. But if that's a mechanism that's working, can you speak to it in how we might be able to use that in disaster and emergencies?
Yeah. And thanks, by the way. I was trying to get off mute. It wouldn't let me off. And then I got a thing on my screen that said, somebody wants to take you off mute. So anyway. Hey, I'm here. Yeah, so thanks. And Christina, you know, what you were saying earlier, I think is very accurate, right? So what we're trying to do is to use what we've learned and what we've done through the pandemic as a springboard into how do we do things better moving forward. And one of the most frustrating things of the many frustrating things on transportation has historically been that, you know, look, wildfires, I think we know there's a law irrevocably decreed in the universe that they happen off hours. And so you've got people that have to evacuate, let's say maybe in the middle of the night, weekends, holidays, and it's not like you can just call paratransit and they're going to pick up. And even if they do, right, we all know they require advance notice. And even if they can waive those notice requirements, you've got all the people served by that agency calling for the same service at the same time. And so the universe of resources that we have are very, very limited. And that coupled with the fact that while a lot of jurisdictions will have written within their plans that, hey, during an emergency, we're going to use paratransit to get people out, you don't see a lot of MOUs. You don't see a lot of MOAs. You don't see a lot of contracts. And so somebody gets that section of the plan and it's like, use accessible transportation resources. Like, what does that look like? How do I do that? And we've seen some jurisdictions that will even go a little further and say, here's who we're going to use, here's the number to call. But didn't actually close the loop with the transportation agency. And so I can tell you one fire, the plan was to use a particular agency, although nobody on the emergency management side had coordinated with that agency. And so when the evacuation order came in, everyone from that agency had evacuated, leaving a fleet of accessible vehicles with no operators. So when we look at COVID and we say, hey, look, if we don't find a way to get shots to people's doors, folks are going to get sick, they're going to suffer, they're going to be hospitalized, and some are going to die. And use that as a justification for kind of cracking this nut, then I think, well, let's just rinse and repeat, except for a different purpose, right? Let's now recognize that we have a way, we have a capability that will allow us to actually get to people and evacuate them during times of emergency. And granted, there is something a little bit different about, hey, let me go to your house on a sunny Tuesday versus let me drive in when there's fire all around me. But we need to be looking at this capability. The other thing that we need to be looking at is the data to better inform that capacity. Right? Christina was saying, we asked people, you need rides, and we didn't always hear. We need to have a better idea of how many people need what and where, generally speaking, they're located. Because that's how we make investment decisions about where do we spend our limited dollars to get the biggest bang for our buck. So I think that's a key piece too.
And this is Christina, just to add, for folks maybe a little less familiar on this, that's not to create registries. That's to invest in infrastructure locally. So while we're looking at the numbers and how many people within a population may need certain things during a disaster, such as accessible transportation, it's not about guaranteeing or offering a registry that they're going to get it. It's about making sure that the community has the resource in place for when they are able to offer it, but not guarantee it.
But Junior, we've heard that for decades about, we need to count you, we need to know where you are. We are everywhere. And certainly, low income communities, there are more people who are carless and resourceless in terms of transportation options. But I think we get sidetracked with where are we? We're everywhere.
Well, that's not necessarily, yes. So anecdotally, right, we're everywhere. But if you actually look at the data, let's say even like an HPI.
A what?
But like Healthy Persons Index. What you'll see is that there are certain areas, even neighborhoods within communities, that are densely populated with people that have these needs. So, like, look at this. Let's say if you're PG&E, and you're only going to bury X number of lines, or you're only going to put in 1 or 2 microgrids. Having that data allows you to put it where it's going to serve the most people with the greatest critical need. And so it's the same thing with this. If I'm going to buy a few more accessible vehicles, which communities do we place those in? And then if I'm going to bring in resources from other communities because there's a disaster, where do I pre-position those resources? So yeah, we are everywhere. I understand that. But we also, if you were to look at, let's say, like a heat map, you'll see that there are certain areas, even within cities, that are densely populated with people who have greater needs. And I really want to highlight what Christina said. I'm not talking about a registry, right? That's different. But yeah, we want to be able to provide the most bang for the buck.
I think, Vance, you touched on a really important part there when you're talking about the staging and caching of resources. Determining the prioritization of those resources and who can access them. If we go back to the Santa Rosa fires, everybody was counting on the same resources, and The fire moved from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and everybody had the same memorandums of agreement with the same groups to provide the same services. So whoever had accessed them first, whoever had the first fire, were the individuals who were able to access those services. And without additional pre-planning, the other jurisdictions were left scrambling for what they could do to kind of make up for those resources. And so that's a really important point in talking about those staging and even extra resources, is who can access them, how do they access them, and what is the priority for that access.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Excellent point, Roxy. There's even so many facilities that rely, Junior, on the same evacuation resource. It's almost like in their contract with these organizations, they need to say, we are served first. You know, you agree to serve us first, or you agree to expose how many other organizations you have the same agreement with, because the contracts are silent on that.
Absolutely. That's an important piece to ask. You know, even if we go back to that very first thing where we're talking about questions for advocates to ask, what services will be provided? How can I access them? You know, and then asking that question as well. Do you know how many other jurisdictions or organizations this group or this paratransit or this memorandum of agreement who you have in the plan is also providing services to, so that I can add that to my plan if it's something, because let's face it, most disasters don't hit just one jurisdiction. They tend to hit those neighboring jurisdictions, places that border and touch other places that are struggling with the same issues. Fires don't stay within the confines of one city or one county or one area. Earthquakes don't, you know, no disasters do. And so we run into this a fair amount. And so asking these questions, going back to what Christina said earlier, may not be something that they've considered or thought of. They may think they have that resource, and you may open up a window for them to make better plans, to make changes to the way that they're doing things, just in bringing to light the potential for that kind of conflict. So June, I don't want to go over past the time. I could, like I said, I could talk all day. Those who know me know it's true.
I want to make sure we hear from other people. Let's see in chat, and I don't see any hands that are raised in the list. Any questions from all of you that have been silent so far?
I see Bruce's hand up.
Go for it, Bruce.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I just have one question. I didn't hear anybody mention the wheelchair access, the WAVE, wheelchair access vehicles program, the WAVE program. Is that something that people know about, or yes, no, maybe?
Go ahead. What is it?
Well, from what I know about it, it was supposed to be for Uber and Lyft to purchase vehicles for them that were accessible.
I see Marilyn's video came back up. Marilyn?
I am not 100% sure, but I believe what you're talking about is what I was discussing earlier about Uber taking on a pilot program in 7, metropolitan markets across the US and Canada. But it was with their own money. I'm not sure of any outside funder that
Okay.
So I'm not 100% sure what this is.
Okay. Thanks.
This is Christina. I believe that's what they call it, though, in those areas. And the reason why is CFILC had worked with disability rights advocates a couple years ago, maybe a few now, when the WAVE Uber and Lyft vehicles became available in San Francisco, there were some surveys done, and in Washington, D.C., because I had done one in Washington. When those vehicles became an option and were included in the app, there were some surveys done to determine how long it took to get one of those vehicles. Once you plugged in the request on the app, how was the ride? And I just remember that overall in the findings of that survey, there were many of us who were able to book a ride in our cities, but the ride wait time was on average 45 minutes to an hour. And then in addition to that, we'd get that wait time and then it would get canceled.
Mhm.
It was like awful. So I actually don't know if anybody is using that anymore because it was such a bad experience for many.
You know, Junior, I've tried to use it, but when I've tried to use it, I've never had the luxury of waiting an hour because I had to, you know, it was semi-emergency to begin with because something else fell through. So it's almost like we need, Marilyn, we need mystery shoppers that have the time to spend hours, you know, trying this out. In a non-emergency space.
Testers would be great. I've actually urged the people in San Diego to do testing, but I haven't been able to get them to do it. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, maybe Russell, that's something you can incorporate into your part 2 and beyond. You know, can we organize with maybe some guidance from Marilyn and the other advocates? You know, if we do that, if we devote time to that, how do we do it right? So we get the kind of documentation that will stand up that we need.
This is Christina.
Thanks.
I'll just quickly add that this reminds me a lot of the surveys that we did about a decade ago when airport shuttles were not giving us accessible rides to the terminal from all the different parking lots. And there were very basic surveys done, and we collected thousands of them. And there was a benefit, though. Every survey submitted was a $50 stipend. So
Nice.
folks were definitely willing to submit those surveys, but it ended up being really good product for the lawsuit.
Very nice. That's a
Yeah.
great model.
I also want to point out that some quick Googling produced results for both Uber and Lyft on the WAVE, wheelchair accessible vehicles, or what they call them. So I would say that both of these websites are kind of a little bit maybe more optimistic than reality in a lot of cases. Certainly my own experience in hailing an Uber was unproductive. I had been informed that they were especially available in London. That was not true. But yeah, there appear to be certain areas that do have coverage for these programs, and I'm not sure. It'd be nice if they were more transparent and open about what it takes, or what what they're doing to expand these pilot areas, or if how many rides they're actually providing as well.
Well, this is Bruce again. I know that in my own experience, I tried to get an Uber for a consumer that I had who just needed a ride from right by Knott's Berry Farm, which is a pretty busy area and a large tourist area at that. And it was about 6:30 at night, and we were never able to get one to come. It just wasn't available at all. And there was no reason. They were saying it just said not available when you went to that option on the phone app. So I mean, if it exists, I don't know where it exists because it wasn't working.
You know, Christina and Roxy Jr., I wanted to go back to people's individual emergency plans on evacuation. And I don't think we often talk to people about the most uncomfortable reality, which may be in a no notice or short notice event. Does the neighbor know how to pick me up and put me in a car and forget my equipment? I just want to live. Have we had those very uncomfortable, disturbing conversations with neighbors about, you know, checking in with me about, you know, if all else fails, I'm gonna help. Let's talk about how you can safely throw me in the back seat or the front seat safely if all else fails. We don't talk about that a lot.
Yeah, this is Christina. I agree, June. We haven't talked about it a lot. Last Friday, I had presented for the California Association of Retired Americans meeting on disaster and emergency preparedness. And that was one of the things I talked about that is really important in personalized preparedness, and why we really encourage folks in disability and IL, disability disaster access and resource centers, not to use existing disaster templates like from the Red Cross and other organizations, because it simply doesn't involve those kinds of really disability cultural questions that need to be discussed. And we all have different needs. And I think we also forget to talk about, what do we do? Everything often is talked about leaving, going. What if you're stuck? What are you going to do if you're stuck? Is there any situation that you would be able to handle if you were stuck at home? And I always think about that young woman in Santa Rosa with the wheelchair that didn't have accessible transportation, and she was sitting outside of her apartment building when she died in the fire. The building didn't end up going up, but she did outside of it. Was it safer for her to have stayed in the home? Could she have done something? Was there some sort of preparedness that could have been done if she was in the house? It's something that I think we need to discuss just as much as the difficulty of how do we get into our neighbor's car or in somebody's vehicle and leave if that's what our choice is going to be. But that's why it's not about disaster and emergency preparedness. It's about personalized disaster and emergency preparedness. Everybody's situation is unique.
Yes, I think we need more of these kind of difficult discussions, that because we're the ones working with people, and sometimes we're the ones that have to bring this up.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, it does need to be a part of that personal preparedness plan. You know, like Christina said, like June said, it's not just about the evacuation plan. It's about having a backup plan in place in case that evacuation plan falls through on every level and every backup, and the neighbor's left without you, even though you talked to them ahead of time about how to appropriately assist you, things like that. You know, we have all kinds of harrowing videos from so many events, you know, Paradise, especially police dash cam of them taking a woman right out of her wheelchair in the middle of the street, in the middle of, you know, this fire. There's actual flames on both sides, and just putting her into the cruiser and leaving, you know. Of course, they didn't take her equipment. Like June said, this is like just survival at its base level. But in the same breath, have those police officers received training to know how to safely transport someone or move them? And yes, they saved her life, but I have no idea if she suffered any injuries or what that looked like in that moment. And so those are definite conversations and programmatic access conversations that need to be had with the individuals who are going in to do those evacuations, the individuals who are doing final sweeps to make sure people have left, like police officers, like fire. Do they have appropriate education on how to communicate or how to make those kinds of quick decisions? What does that look like? So valid point, June. Thank you. And again, we have these conversations all the time where we're saying we should, we need to. There's not a ton of hard, steadfast answers. There's a lot of shoulds and a lot of need tos. But watching different organizations, like Christina said, working with individuals on making those personal preparedness plans. Christina, if someone contacted you and said, I really have been completely unable to make an evacuation plan, are there resources? What is the process of assisting them in kind of getting through that piece?
Yeah, great question. And we have some of the locals on the phone with us today. So not all of the independent living centers are disability disaster access and resource centers, DDARs, but the ones that are, part of their contract includes assisting individuals in creating that personalized preparedness plan. And so that was not something that the funder requested, but something that, CFILC very much believes in and wants to make sure that, in addition to providing resources and referrals, that who better as folks with lived experience with disability to provide that level of support to somebody. Because I can tell you, Red Cross workers and others that, we've done secret shopping with to see what personal preparedness looks like, is not thinking about it from a disability perspective. And why would they? I mean, how do they know?
Right. Thank you.
Trina, do you want to, or maybe I can help you? I don't know that we've made some of the comments in chat totally accessible, but maybe there are some good links in here, and maybe Megan and Trina this is something we can include when we post the archive, because there are some nice
Yes.
resources in the chat that we should get. But there are a few here you might want to hear. Let's see. So Megan said, just check for me in San Francisco. It says, I can wave down to me in 8 minutes. That's from Megan. Whoa. And then
June, this is Megan. I've promised Christina I'm going to test that out and see if it actually comes and is accessible, and I will let y'all know.
okay. And then Megan Sampson says, the last time I tried to call a Lyft, I don't drive due to traumatic brain injury. It was 45 minutes wait, which they canceled after 30 minutes and put me back into the queue for another 40 minutes. This was on Monday at 3 p.m.
Those are some very big experiences. And so is it really, area dependent?
And Megan, what area are you from?
I'm in Sacramento, California.
Okay, and you said, I recently pre-scheduled a Lyft for a medical appointment, and at the time of the arrival, I received a text stating that no drivers were available.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a pickle.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating.
And then Russell said, I believe that the drivers' pools for these TNCs, Uber Lyft, have also been dwindling dramatically. Recently heard a story on NPR that wait times and unavailability of vehicles is becoming more common in all cities and areas. I actually heard that as well.
I also think that it's part of the, the kind of grander conversation that we need to have about, you know, pay scale and some of those kind of things too. I think a lot of these people that are working for these transit, you know, the transportation network companies are realizing that it's not a viable source of income. You know, they're putting more wear and tear on their car than they're making back, you know, driving.
You know, there are so many levels here that we've just unpeeled today. You know, the CPUC advocacy with Uber and Lyft, you know, Roxy's issues about not only no warning and short warning evacuation, whether it's by the jurisdiction planning or your own personal planning, but controlled reentry, which I think is another whole conversation, which there may be some slightly easier fixes to. And then the third one you mentioned, Roxy, was, what was it? I can't remember. There was a third one.
Yeah, there was also the access during what could be considered unsafe times. So the example I used was in Paradise, when they allowed people that in first re-entry to go and survey their properties, the properties weren't physically accessible, but they also were struggling to work a system that allowed support systems or others to come in on behalf, because the system was requiring a driver's license or proof of residency. And so, you know, even individuals using public transit, are they going to allow a paratransit bus to go in? Will that bus wait for the individual? What if they get dropped off and then it's not accessible and no one's coming back for hours? There were so many different levels of that kind of immediate reentry, where it's not a permanent reentry, but it is a part of what could be considered a dangerous location that may need assessment or, again, support services or other individuals to go in behalf of. We saw the same in the volcanoes in Hawaii as well.
You know, I want to, this is a very hard conversation to just end, and we're getting close on time, but it just shows you how complex and nuanced this really is. And you probably need to take each one of those areas and do a deep dive, because they're so complex. So I want to just thank you, Roxy and Marilyn and Vance, and some of the rest of you, Christina, that have, you know, kind of helped to set the table here and make us think about the uncomfortable realities of where we are with this topic. Thank you all, and I think this is just the beginning of a lot of different activities, hopefully, that we need to pursue. And I think that's the good part of these calls. They're not so regimented, that we do get to do a little bit deeper, at least to uncover all the things we need to keep working on. So thank you both, Roxy and Marilyn. We know you're taking a break, but we know where you live, so we will still find you. So thank you both very much. And Shauna, did you want to put up the poll?
I would love to put up the poll, June. Here we go. And I have launched the poll. I'll go ahead and read the questions out loud, June.
Great.
Okay. Question number 1. Please rate how helpful this month's speakers, forum topic sessions were for you. Not helpful, okay, fair, good, and very helpful. Question number 2. Please rate your opportunity to participate in the coalition discussion. Choices are poor, fair, okay, good, and excellent. Question 3. Please rate the accessibility of the coalition meetings. Poor, fair, okay, good, or excellent. Question 4. How likely are you to attend a future disaster strategies coalition meeting? Very likely, somewhat likely, or unlikely? We'll give it another 30 seconds and we'll close the poll.
I have a funny question to ask. This is Christina. Where does that poll show up? Because sometimes it shows up automatically and then sometimes it doesn't.
I think
This is
we're-
Megan. I think that might be if you're in the account as a host.
Yeah,
Say that
or an
again, Megan. I
It
didn't
will
hear
not
you.
show up for you.
we're
If
the
you're in the
host.
account as a host or an admin, it will not
Oh.
show for you.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't see it either, so it's frustrating. So anyway, we have 3 minutes left. Any last words from anyone?
Good discussion. Thanks, Jane. Appreciate it.
Just a quick plug. This is Russell Rawlings, and I will be here with you all on the fourth Thursday, which is the 22nd. At the same time, please watch for notices going out on the California Disaster Access listserv.
I think, Russell, we were gonna continue the discussion related to personal planning for alternative power
Mhm.
sources when we lose power for long or short periods of time.
Correct. Yeah. And definitely this topic also is certainly something that can be, I feel like we can strategically organize around. There's a lot of, I think, unknowns with what is available because there are obviously some efforts being made, but it would be nice to figure out how to push to expand and find ways to grow more of the transit network company involvement in transportation, especially in emergency situations.
Okay, well, thank you all again. Have a good one. See you in 2 weeks. Same time, same channel. And
Well, that's slightly different, actually. The 22nd uses a different Zoom link, please.
that's right.
We will make sure that that goes out on the listserv, but
Same time, different channel.
different channel, same
Zoom.
time.
Thanks for
Yeah.
the correction.